Hey everybody, it's Josh. There are days that try men's souls. We try to walk in faith as Christians. Those of us who are not some lukewarm Christian or progressive Christian, just using the label of Christian as some sort of virtue signal or some sort of mask. We are warriors of peace, but war is a hard, brutal thing. I had too many brothers and sisters. I feel I've let down. I feel the weight of that responsibility on me, even though I know it's not what Christ wants. But in a way, that guilt of letting someone down, not being quick enough in guiding someone to their faith, that feels awful. Like a million stab wounds right to the soul. But then Christ heals me. I can't be everyone for everything. I am not Christ. I'm just a lowly shepherd trying to find the lost and the broken. I understand that there's only so much that we can do, but that does not make it easier when you see a brother or sister falling into hard times. We have to learn mainly about forgiveness. Beyond the love is forgiveness, because you have to have forgiveness to have true love. Christ forgave us even though we're so unworthy. And yet, most of the time, we can't even forgive ourselves, let alone our enemies. You know, there's been problems with churches. But if you read Corinthians, there's been problems with churches since the very beginning. And a lot of that is that we don't want to hear the inconvenient things. We don't want to hear the things that may make our lives a little harder. Like, well, I really like going out and cheating on my wife, or name your sin. And conveniently, your faith is devoid of that. When you know deep down that is not right. You know, you read Corinthians, and one story that comes to mind is the church was actually affirming and okay with a man who was sleeping with his stepmother. It was just a big old weird orgy in the ancient Roman Greek times. They had no sexual morality at all, which led to people think, oh, well, don't tell somebody what to do in the bedroom. That's not any of your business. And you're right, I've felt that way most of my life. I don't care personally or want somebody to be judged on what they do in their bedroom, unless they're bringing minors into it. The problem is that leads our whole society into a horrible spiral to the abyss. Now, again, that's not the same as, oh, you shouldn't be accepted in the church if you do whatever sin it is. Of course you should be. In fact, that's the people we should be welcoming the most, because a church is a hospital for sinners. But these people, they don't consider it a sin because it's not convenient for them. So the entire world slips into the void, and the innocent pay for it. And I can't tell you how many times I've heard atheists screaming and judging about, your God is so evil, he's letting kids die of cancer, and look at the Old Testament and how brutal it was, the genocides. The genocides? Really? First of all, most of the time it said to drive out we'll take the Canaanites. It didn't say to kill all the Canaanites. It said to drive out the Canaanites because they were corrupting the land. They were corrupting the society. And it was bleeding over into other parts of Israel. The Old Testament is one lesson after another that God let man learn for themselves for the most part. The only time God stepped in was when there was a supernatural threat. And by supernatural threat, I mean the fallen angels sleeping with women, making horrible monstrosities, the Nephilim. I didn't say that right either. So what did he have to do? Because it got so bad, he tried to clean it up, but it got so bad he just had to bring the great flood. He had to reset. A supernatural threat, and yes, there were innocents that got caught up in it. Moses, you had the supernatural threat of the Egyptian gods, who obviously had a good deal of power. But God laughed at that tiny little bit of power that they thought was so great. And he kind of rubbed it in their face. Because they mocked him so much, he mocked them. And he wanted to show in the grandest way that no, I'm the one in charge, not you. The Canaanites, the very prominent enemy of God, the small g god Baal, people would, well, that was a big place for the sexual immorality. They were prostituting themselves out in the temples of Baal. It talks a little bit about that throughout most of the Old Testament. Read Hosea. They talk about his wife was a temple prostitute. God forced Hosea to marry her, or didn't force him, but told him to, and he was a good servant. But not only were they prostituting themselves out, which is bad enough, but it's a forgivable thing. They were sacrificing people. The entire... There isn't one lesson in the Old Testament that God didn't have his people deal with firsthand. People talk about the issue of slavery. Was Moses not a slave? Were the Israelites not slaves? He talked about human sacrifice and even worse, child sacrifice. Did he not send Abraham up the mountain to sacrifice his own son. He had to make him feel it. He had to make him feel that sting and plead with God, saying, please take me instead, because that's what any great father would do. And God saw this, and he was like, okay. He wasn't going to let him kill his son. He wasn't going to let him kill Isaac. But he had to let them feel it. Just like you can tell your kids, don't touch the stove. Don't touch this hot stove. Sometimes those kids are so stubborn, they have to go and do it themselves to find out. They have to get that burn. You know, it's not too dissimilar from the old thing where, I remember the old cartoon where Donald Duck found Huey, Dewey, and Louie. Now, this was a play on it. They would find people, the kids smoking a cigar or something, and then make them smoke like 10 cigars in a row. Or a whole pack, smoking cigarettes and smoke 2 packs of cigarettes. Huey, Dewey, and Louie were getting him the cigars for his birthday. He felt bad about that. We have to let our kids make their own mistakes. Because if we just tell them, no, don't do that, we don't give them even an explanation of why they shouldn't do it, which we usually don't give, is not enough to satisfy their curiosity. They have to go and do it. And we live in a fallen world. It is clear from the beginning, God understood that we had to have free will, because he didn't want robots. He wanted somebody who would love him. A being that was free to love or not love. Because if you're free to love, you have to be free not to love. And he can't make you love him. People say, well, if you don't like God, then he's going to send you to hell. What kind of God is that? I don't believe that. He's not sending anyone to hell. You're sending yourself to hell. If you don't want to be with God throughout your life, why would you want to be with God when you die? Or all of a sudden, should we just forget your wishes through your whole entire life and go against your wishes and say, no, now you're going to go with God. Now we're going to corrupt heaven too, because you decided you're going to worship yourself, or you're going to worship something in this world instead of God. And the little toad, the children dying of cancer is the absolute worst thing, and the atheists throw it in our faces all the time. Because they know somebody who is seeking God. That'll just turn them right away from them. That'll just poison the well right there. It's a sick tactic. It really is. God didn't make robots. And yes, God made natural disasters happen. He did. But you know what? A lot of disease and natural disaster, that comes from us. That comes from the chaos we allowed into this world. We opened up the door to the darkness, and we still blame God, who gave us paradise. Sure, he didn't give us, right now, paradise. He gave the first people, Adam and Eve, paradise. You know, no matter what you think about the story of Genesis, I think it is a lot of symbolic language and, metaphorical stories. They're just lessons. They show you exactly what happened, how we turned away from God. But as I said, as a child, sometimes you have to let kids learn from themselves, and then they must be punished. If whatever, getting hurt or whatever, isn't punishment enough. But then comes the adult stage. And some of us do, and some of us don't learn by then. Many of us don't. It's getting longer and longer for us to learn our lessons. God waited until the time was right. And he showed how his amazing grace could save a wretch like me and you. He showed how love and forgiveness are the best weapons against fury, against vengeance. Forgiveness is the greatest thing that we have, because it frees us. It frees us from that corruption. It frees us from that anger. And yeah, you can sit there and stew over someone who did you wrong or hurt you or your family. One of my favorite comic book characters was the Punisher for a long time. The mob killed his family, so he made it his mission to wipe out all criminals. Just as many as he could before he died. And it sounds so cool. It sounded like something that needed to be done. Nobody wanted to do it. Nobody wanted to talk about it. But it needed to be done. I always wondered, why are these lame heroes always telling them, this isn't the way? Because they were always putting the supervillains and the criminals in jail, and they would just bust right out again. But the eye for an eye will make the world blind. Not being able to forgive will eat you alive. There's no way, if you hold vengeance in your heart, you're going to be able to do God's work. You're going to be paralyzed, a slave to your sin. Just as Paul tells us, the Apostle Paul. We are dead to our sin. We are slave to it. And really, in God's eyes, we are dead until we are born again. Until we can open our eyes and see that love and forgiveness and compassion and empathy, that those are the ways the world, those are the ways to fix the world. The world is much different. The world is darkness. The world is the Punisher. That, yeah, go get him, Punisher. Show him. There was an old show called The Shield. And I remember when it was about some dirty cops. And the main character, Vic Mackey, he was just seemed like a sleazeball. But then what happened? There was some child toucher, fondler. Did more than that. Can't say it on YouTube. But Vic wasn't having it. He went out and took care of that guy. And then I was like, yeah, I can get behind this guy now. It's exactly how they draw you into the darkness. They say, of course, that guy who touches and abuses kids should be taken care of. Of course he should. The devil has a lot more to offer on the surface than God does. Why do you think so many easily go to him without even knowing most of the time? He doesn't care if you know or not. He's happy to have the ignorant. Oh, there's a doe again. I love how almost every day I see some amazing sign out here. This beautiful doe. Oh, there's a couple of them. We need to be gentle and peaceful like the doe. Frolicking through the woods. Not hurting anyone except for when we run in front of a car. Let me see if I can get them on tape. I'm on an app that I can't zoom in on, but there's right up there, there's one of them. She's walking away. God shows me these signs every time I'm talking to you, and I love it. I was feeling down today because I feel I've failed some of my brothers and sisters. And I'm sorry if I have. I am very sorry. I want you all to focus on your faith. Focus on forgiveness. That starts with forgiving yourself. Because until you learn to love yourself, not in a hedonistic way, but in a holy way, in a divine way, the way God loves us, you will not know that peace. I'm going to get this little fawn on video if I can. One of the fawns, he galloped off. Let's see if I can get him right up there. I don't know if you can see him. Wagging his tail at me. Bye, baby. It is vital that you forgive yourself and that you forgive the people that hurt you. You know, I talk about it a lot, probably too much but It's a Beautiful Day in the Neighborhood movie about Mr. Rogers. It is one of the most beautiful movies I've seen because the guy investigating, or the guy who was going to write a story about Mr. Rogers was just a broken man. And everybody around Mr. Rogers said that Mr. Rogers loves broken people. He made it his goal to try to help them, to fix them, to guide them towards peace, which is what I want to do. The man's father had abandoned him and his sister when their mom was on her deathbed. And he couldn't forgive his dad for that. Mr. Rogers told him, your father, no matter the problems, he helped create you and make you into what you are today. the man you are today is partially because of your father. And then he took a moment of silence to think about all the people that made them what they are today. Hey, babies. Hey, beauties. I gotta see this. I love you. I'll talk to you soon.